Uprighter. Thanks for joining me. In this video we're going to be working on my 2009 Suzuki V-Strom 650. We are upgrading the factory springs and we are going to take you through it step by step. This is not a project that I have done before, so we are going to walk through it together. As you notice, I've got my box of Sonic springs. Rich Desmond over at Sonic took care of me, sent him an email. He shot it right back the same day, and he told me exactly what I needed. In this case, 0.95 springs, 10 weight oil. As you can see, it comes with instructions, and also a spacer pipe. And we're going to get into the pros and cons of this a little bit later in the video. So let's get started. Okay, our objective is to remove the forks from the frame. What I'm going to do is remove the side panels as well. I think it just makes it easier to work and get the correct torque values on your upper and lower triple trees. So it's something I prefer to do. So we remove the side panels, and you have to remove everything associated with the fork tube. That includes a fork brace, like this Richland Rick here, if you happen to have one, your brake caliper, your wheel, of course, and your fender. So we have to remove all of these bits before we can get the fork tubes out. Then we just loosen them from the triple tree, slide them out, do what we got to do. There's a few other steps involved. One thing we make sure we need to do is support the bike from the front. There's a couple of varieties. A lot of people will hang straps from the rafters. I'm going to be using a floor jack for the purposes of this repair, and I'll place that underneath. Okay, we've removed all the plastic bits from the motorcycle. This gives us access to the lower triple tree bolts as well as the upper triple tree clamp. And we've removed our brake calipers, all our wire guides and supports. We're using bungee cord here to secure our brake caliper so there's no strain on it. This is the speedo sender, which will get removed when we remove the wheel as well as the fender. The bike is still kind of supported on its own with the center stand, so I'm going to get the floor jack out and we're going to get it ready to get the front end boosted into the air. Before that, we're going to loosen all the bolts and whatnot associated with removing the wheel, and then subsequently the fender. Okay, everything's been removed from the front forks. They are now free to be accessed. Next, we'll move on to breaking loose the bolts on the lower triple tree on both sides. And before we move on, we will open a couple of turns the top fork cap. Okay, next the instructions say you need to come in here and open these up all the way to the top. That loosens pressure on the spring inside. Now that we have our preload adjuster turned out all the way to the top, we want to loosen the fork cap a couple of turns. This makes it easier to get off once we remove it from the top triple tree. I'm using a 15/16 wrench to do this. The preload is at its highest position. We've also loosened the fork cap a couple of turns. This will make it easier to remove. The only thing left to do is loosen the upper triple tree bolt. This will allow us to remove the fork. Once it's loosened, carefully slide the fork out. Over at our workbench, we've got our DL650 service manual, instructions from Sonic springs, and of course the springs themselves. Looking pretty good. Spacer pipe, we'll get into that shortly. And we've got our forks over here. Next step is to remove the fork caps and get the oil and springs out of there. Let's get to it. While we're doing this, we can expect a little upward force from the cap due to the spring that's inside. So we want to put a little pressure down as we're unspinning. Cap should be about that long from what I've seen in pictures. We also have a rag here in case anything crazy happens. Okay, that wasn't too bad. And we can see here, we've got the fork cap. It appears to be a washer. And the spacer that's inside. Beyond this, we've got our spring and the fluid. Okay, with those two pieces out of the way, we can slide down our fork tube and reveal our factory spring, which we should be able to just slide out. And of course, there's going to be some oil with it. On top of the spring is a little washer. Maybe not so little, but bear that in mind. Okay. Factory spring came out. No problem. All we have is oil left inside the fork tube. Now we just dump out the old oil. Be sure to pump the shock a few times to make sure that you expel all of the oil. When you're pumping the shock tube to expel all the oil, don't hit the stops too hard. It resorts to drips within a couple of minutes. With the oil out of the fork tube, we are ready to move on to the next phase, and that is reassembly. This includes using pieces and components from Sonic springs as provided in the package. Also, that includes a PVC spacer, which is much deliberated, but appears to work over tens, if not hundreds of thousands of miles without problem. So let's move on to that next step. Let's take a look at what we have here. Our fork, stock spring, stock washer, stock spacer, and the fork cap, which also has a washer on it that's held on by this cotter pin. Now, according to the Sonic Springs directions, they indicate that if you have a DL650, which this is, that we would cut their PVC pipe into 2 equal 4 1/4 inch long spacers. This accommodates for the new setup. They also indicate that you can go with the original setup, but include all of their washers to make up the difference. The stock spacer is 4 1/8 inches, and we've increased to 4 1/4 inches. Even though, if you look at the two springs, you'll see that the Sonic spring is indeed shorter than the factory spring. How this is supposed to work: you take your new Sonic spring, you insert that into your fork. Next, you're going to take one of their washers. You're going to put that over the spring, and you're going to take your newly cut spacer, 4 1/4 inches for the DL650, and that goes next. And then the next washer from Sonic Springs, that goes there. and then your fork cap goes on top of it and closes everything up. So that is for the DL650. Please read the instructions carefully for your particular model. Let me go assemble the last fork. I already have the other one done. I'll show you how this goes as well. Okay, the next step in reinstallation is to get the fork loaded with oil. It requires 150 milliliters of oil according to the Sonic Springs documentation. Along with the order came 10 weight fork oil, which is correct according to Rich based on my weight and riding style. I also have the 95 weight springs ready to install as well. To accomplish this task, I picked up a little gadget from Motion Pro. And what this does is it allows you to measure the amount of oil in your fork tube and to remove the excess. Great little tool, so we'll get to use that. Already preset, 150 milliliters. So what we'll do is we'll pour in some oil and get started. Okay, I've put enough oil in there. What we're going to do is we're going to just gently run the fork tube up and down. I've already done this a couple of times. We're going to do this, and this will get air out of the system. Make sure it's nice and smooth flowing. Okay, now that we've removed any air bubbles, use the same procedure to eliminate excess oil in the fork. We're pretty good. There is literally just enough oil in this quart to do the job. Now that we have our oil in, we insert our spring. And we slide the tube up. We insert a spacer as provided. Our cleaned and deburred spacer tool, or spacer. And pull the tube up some more. And finally, our next washer, as supplied by Sonic Springs. From here we get to the more difficult task of putting the fork cap back on. However, if you take your time and use a heavy wrench, it will help you seat it better. Be very careful not to cross thread it, which is very easy to do. When you tighten the cap, tighten it just until it stops. With the exception of putting the final torque on the fork cap, you have completed the disassembly and reassembly. Now would be a good time to go ahead and clean up your fork tube and your fork and prepare for reinstallation. Well, all right, with our forks back together and all cleaned up, we are ready for reinstallation, which is essentially the reverse of the breakdown procedure, with one exception. What you want to do is make note of how high your fork tube goes into the upper triple tree. Factory default is this position. However, if you're like me and you like your motorcycle to turn in a little bit faster, you can raise it up in the triple tree just a bit. I wouldn't go over 13 millimeters. I keep mine at 12 millimeters. That being said, that's all there is to it. I've got a little bit more work to do on my bike before I put it back together. But I hope you enjoyed this video and it was informative and helped you through the spring upgrade. Thanks for watching. I'm Zephyr.